In an epic attempt to make billions of dollars off selling toys, Mattel created the Masters of the Universe in the early 80s, and the result became pop culture history. Since its initial launch in 1981, the franchise has spawned a variety of products, including 6 lines of action figures, 4 animated television series, several comic book series, and a feature-length film. With all the sales, hype, and naturally a movie version was inevitable, which brings us to, hey man, remember that movie? The podcast where we relive the wonder of movies past and compare them to today's incredible standards. I am your host, the J-Man, Jesse B. Along with me is my co-host, Steve L. How you doing, Steve?
I spent parts of the last 2 nights watching this movie, so I guess you could say I'm pretty terrible.
Yeah, I don't blame you.
Yeah, you picked an interesting one to start with, that's for sure.
Yeah, I figured we'd start off with a bang, you know?
Absolutely, go big or go home.
Tell the audience who we are and what we like. Why don't you start with yourself? What kind of movies do you like, Steve?
Generally, it's pretty diverse. You know, anything from film noir, LA Confidential, Chinatown, Goodfellas, stupid comedies with Chris Farley, and comic book movies, and a million things in between.
Right on. Yep. Action is my favorite. I do love action, adventure type movies. Definitely comic book stuff, because I have a strong background in comics. I like comedies too, I really do. Those are my 2 favorite genres of movies. I am a child of the 80s, so I have a special place in my heart for anything 80s related.
Myself as well, actually. That about sums me up.
Right on, which brings us to our whole theme for this podcast, which is going to be, we're kind of looking back at older movies from that era and seeing how they compare to today's standards. Do they still hold up?
I would suggest to you that this movie did not hold up to even 80s standards.
Yeah, well, let's break into it right now.
All right, let's go.
We have Masters of the Universe. It hit the theaters in 1987. But here we are, kind of late 80s. Yeah, and the debut of Dolph Lundgren, pretty much, right?
Did this come out before Rocky IV or after? I wonder, because I sense that my gut tells me that this was the movie after Rocky IV. This was his chance to be the next action star who can't speak English very well after Arnold Schwarzenegger.
You're right. I believe. Yep. This was just a little bit. Okay. This was 2 years after Rocky IV. So.
Right. Okay, that makes sense.
It wasn't his debut as so much on the big screen, but it was his debut starring in a movie.
He certainly had big budget experience, and he was a good villain in that movie, and he didn't speak a lot of that movie, and didn't really speak a lot in this one either, but
yeah oh man, yeah, I feel like they cut down on his lines as much as possible because they were nervous about his accent.
They seem to cut down on everything. He was the least interesting sort of superhero ever. He didn't really, for lots of the scenes, he was ducking behind cover and shooting with the laser. I don't want to get too into it right off the bat, but he's almost like a bit character in the movie. His 2 sort of cohorts were, I think, more of action heroes than he was.
It's hard to even say like where their mindset was when they chose Dolph Lundgren as the main character, as the lead for the movie. He didn't have a lot of acting experience. I mean, he definitely had the look, but then again, there were probably a couple other guys at least that were stars at the time that had the body.
I think when you watch something like this, it really makes you appreciate, like Arnold or even Stallone for a certain extent, because they have that charisma. Dolph Lundgren has the charisma of a block of wood. He is, he just doesn't, there's no anything there to him. He's just there, and so that's one of the things that sort of comes into my mind. It's like, okay, this is why Arnold was a huge star, is because his movies were just as big and just as dumb, but he had that star quality that it's just not there. It's just he's like a charisma black hole. He's extremely uninteresting, and he actually makes the people around him less interesting just because they're in his horrific presence.
Wow, that's some pretty hardcore criticism.
I'm known to be a bit opinionated. I hope that isn't a problem.
No, but I think you're right on track with that. I think it rings true. Dolph Lundgren, he might be a really great guy in person. I have no idea. I've never met him. His acting was it was totally not there in this movie. His charisma, like you were saying, it just wasn't happening. He tried to be a nice guy. I think a little too much in this movie. What do you think?
He's probably a dick in real life. Come on, let's be honest.
Yeah, he's one. He hangs out with Stallone and Van Damme and them, and those guys all have egos, right?
Oh yeah, no question. I think that all joking aside, maybe he is a nice guy. He's just not a very good actor.
Yeah, he definitely had a lot of opportunities. I mean, after this movie, like, he didn't exactly become a huge Hollywood star or the most popular actor in the world, but he had a lot of roles after this.
Yeah, they tried. They tried to give him multiple chances to, be that, Van Damme, Stallone, Schwarzenegger type of, star, and he just was never able to put it together.
I want to talk about how far this character, He-Man, actually missed the mark of the actual, cartoon character. One thing I've really noticed, picked up on, is that the supporting characters, they treat He-Man like he's a regular guy. They expected him to be dead already, and I thought that was hilarious.
No one's really impressed with He-Man, and neither is the audience, really. I don't think He-Man's too impressed with himself, because he doesn't really do much.
Man-at-Arms was like, "Oh, He-Man, you're alive," and then you're like, "I guess that's good."
Yeah, and you could ask the question: is it really good for the first hour and a half of the movie? Because he doesn't do much.
Right, he doesn't do really anything.
Right. The only thing he brings to the table is large pecs.
Yeah. Oh my God. Just the underwhelming quality of He-Man was so, like, this guy is supposed to be their champion, their saving grace. He's like their savior. If Skeletor could only defeat He-Man, then he would be able to conquer the universe. But in this movie,
it's always funny to me when they make a movie based on a property, whether it be like an action figure, a cartoon, a comic book, or whatever, and they completely ignore the universe and the internet and everything today. It'd be interesting, are there He-Man sort of fanboys that if they made this movie today, like, people would just be freaking out, I'd imagine. I'll admit that my He-Man knowledge is not particularly strong, but I remember the world that they lived in is sort of this dark, Castle Grayskull looked like a villain sort of hanging out, and that was the heroes. It was like this dark world. He rode around on a tiger, and there's just none of that here.
yes.
It is strange. It's very strange. I don't know why you make a He-Man movie and then just ignore all of that.
Right. I believe, here's my theory. It was a big project to tackle. He-Man is basically a derivative of Conan the Barbarian. It's more like a kid's version of Conan. And the world that they live in, Eternia, is really colorful and full of fantasy elements. So it would be a really big budget production if they were to do it if they do it full credit.
Well, and that sort of, I guess, explains the other big red flags for me is when they're transplanted to Earth somehow, right? And I guess that probably is budget related as well.
Yeah.
When you're talking about fantasy, I'll believe, if you create a universe, I'm willing to sort of accept the laws of that universe and okay, it's not realistic, but you're not looking for realism. But when you transplant those characters into Earth, it sort of draws out it makes them stick out. It makes you realize it sort of breaks the illusion.
Absolutely, yeah, I agree with that. The choice to put them on Earth it's like so underwhelming. I understand that they my theory was that they did it because they couldn't afford all this stuff that belongs in the He-Man universe, like dragons and Snake Mountain, which is this giant mountain that's in the form of a snake. So they did the budget cut thing where they decided to say, oh, let's bring them to Earth. That sounds like a unique idea. But it really just ended up being such a like jarring contrast of like these fantasy characters in a real world. It was just cornball.
Well, I'll go even one step further than that. It's like Inception. There's like layer upon layer of this foolishness because He-Man is a fantasy character. The villains in this movie, or the troopers that he's fighting against, are more science fiction type of characters. They look like stormtroopers, really. They wear black instead of white. So you have the clash of Conan running around with a sword when everyone else has laser guns, and then you have all of that transplanted into Earth, and it's like just several layers of insanity, and so it just doesn't make any sense, and you just end up confused.
Right. I think it's really a director's nightmare. I think that's why a lot of people have shied away from doing another He-Man movies, because the cartoon is just like a hodgepodge of everything. It's like, okay, let's get all these fantasy elements in there, like lasers and dragons and everything, really. And it's just, when you make a movie, you have to focus more on, okay, just the sci-fi elements or just the fantasy elements. It's really kind of impossible to blend it all together well.
How about a story? You can start with just a story. Mm-hmm. The movie sort of plops you into Act 2, really. There's no setup. You're not even sort of explaining the world, really. I mean, there is a little bit of lip service, I think, at the beginning of the movie. The world is sort of, I think, most people would say, is sort of shallow. It's just, He-Man versus Skeletor, and that's sort of it. But I think you could make a movie there. But it just seems like it was, let's just have a couple of action scenes to push them onto Earth and tell Courtney Cox's dead parents story.
Yeah, I agree. The cartoon came out in 1983, and it was really very cheesy, very cheesy. There's enough material there to make a decent story out of, but at the same time, there's a lot of things that just would not translate well to film.
Sure, I think that what you could do is, He-Man, like you mentioned, it's sort of like a Conan the Barbarian sort of rip-off, and you could tell a generic story that uses sort of cliches, but it could have a beginning, middle, and an end. Maybe I just missed it. Did Castle Grayskull even make an appearance? Are those scenes when they're in the throne room? Is that because that's supposed to be Castle Grayskull? I don't even know.
Yeah, exactly. That is supposed to be Castle Grayskull, and it was so like shocking to me. I'm like, why is this place not only like incredibly cleaned and polished, but the lighting is just like it's perfect lighting. This is supposed to be a dark, dreary castle.
You know what it looks like, because all those scenes are or the scenes leading up to that were in the desert. So when I see that throne room, to me it looks like, in my head, they're in like the middle of a pyramid or something. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah.
That's sort of that's where they are. That is most certainly not Castle Grayskull.
Yeah, I was thinking, like, wait a minute, how did they get in Trump Tower all of a sudden? It's like, who's paying these employees to mop the floor 24/7, make sure it's shiny?
It's very, the whole thing is very strange. Right? And Courtney Cox, was this her first movie, or?
That's a good question. I'm really not sure. It's probably one of the first ones.
One of them, yeah.
But she seemed pretty young, like what, 17?
Yeah, she was young. And what's funny is one of my assumptions when I got this DVD box and saw her name sort of plastered on it pretty early was like, oh, okay, this is one of those things where she had a very small role, but because she is now Courtney Cox, they're going to put her name at the front of the list to try to, get people interested to buy, to get the movie.
It was actually her second movie. She did another movie earlier that year called Down Twisted. Never heard of it.
I know either.
But I'm sure it was probably a small role. This was pretty much a kids movie. I mean, rated PG, based on He-Man, a kids cartoon. So I mean, she didn't go on to do kids movies, that's for sure.
Yeah, yeah, and once again, everything was so shoddily thrown together. You know, you meet her and her boyfriend, and the only things you know about them really are that her parents are dead. He's a musician, and of course, both of those things become, you know, critical plot elements at one time or another. Her character doesn't really have any depth at all, and really are kind of stupid and annoying. Like, they find this. Well, let's get to the key, right? They find this key that is in a small crater. It's obviously been, you know, launched from space or something like that, and they just pick it up and act like nothing is weird or wrong with it at all. And it's just,
yeah, they're just like, oh, look at this cool thing I found. I wonder what it does. Beep, boop, 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 and start messing with it.
Yeah, like, it's clearly not of anything that you would have seen in 1987 walking around in a music store or an arcade. It looks like some sort of bizarre torture device, but
it does.
they act like it's like something. Like, they act like it was a half-empty can of Jack Daniels. They just pick it up and think they got great luck.
It's really not that interesting at all for someone to like take it with them. Like, if you didn't know it made those sounds and did that prism thing, you wouldn't be interested in it at all. You just be like, oh, this is some like old car part or something.
Yeah, that's true. Like a random hunk of metal or something. It doesn't. Its shape is kind of unique, but you know, it's not anything you'd be like jazzed to find on the ground. You know, I don't know about you, but I don't just randomly start picking metal up off the ground.
Exactly. I mean, just looking at it, you would have no clue that it's a musical device. It's like, oh, there's a piece of junk over there.
Yeah, it's very convenient.
That's typically referred to as the Macguffin. It's like in screenwriting terms, it's the item that drives the characters to either seek it out or do something with it. It's kind of like, you know, a plot device that's sort of forced.
There was a lot of that on that Earth characters. There was a lot of that forced stuff, you know.
Yeah.
It all sort of originated on those two things. Like, he's the musician, so that comes in handy because he can play the key. Her parents have died, so that, you know, when one of the bad guys does the old dark helmet trick and, you know, converts herself into an image of her mother, she falls for that and, you know, hands the key back over. You know, the interesting thing is I don't really know how, you know, the bad guys go to Courtney Cox's house, they find a picture of her parents, realize that the parents are dead, and that could be used against Courtney Cox. But I found it impressive that the bad guys were able to know what her mother's voice sounded like by looking at a picture of her.
Oh, wow. Yeah, that's movie logic. Or bad movie logic.
Indeed.
Oh, wow. Yeah, they didn't even like try there at all. Oh god, the whole scene, that's probably the worst scene in the movie for me. Out of all the craziness of this movie, that scene is the most absurd. When
the bad guy, I forget the character's name, it's the female character.
Right.
When she turns back into herself, Courtney Cox screams in horror. I burst out laughing, I have to admit. It was bad. And yeah. I do want to say, for a bad movie, I thought most of the actors in it were pretty good.
Okay.
Like I said, I thought Courtney Cox was pretty good outside of that scene. I thought that the actor who played Skeletor, I believe it's Frank Langella, is that right?
Frank Langella, okay. He actually took the role because, believe it or not, his son loved the character of Skeletor.
Well, I believe it because he was fully into it. I mean, he was chewing up the screen, and he really, really sold it. I thought that, you know, probably, you know, the recurring theme here. I thought that the dwarf-looking character,
Quill Door.
Two things. He looked like, in my alternate reality, he gets stuck on Earth and turns into Leprechaun.
Yeah, he looks
like Leprechaun, and he even sounds a little bit like Leprechaun.
Does this movie predate the first Leprechaun movie?
I don't know. Actually, are we sure that he's not Leprechaun?
Maybe it's Warwick Davis snuck into that little costume or makeup.
So I thought, his makeup, his mask or whatever they did was his voice was not moving well with that, and I found that distracting. And then the only person more fake than a huge fake mask was Dolph Lundgren. Well, we've already sort of beaten that horse to death.
Okay, so I want to talk about this Quill Door thing. This is a character that was not at all in the comics, in the cartoon, in the toys. This is just a totally original character that they're like, hey, let's throw this weird looking thing in there, because kids love like mascot characters. And they're like probably something to the effect of all these other characters from the cartoon or from the comic book are just too difficult for us to put together. So they put together this thing that's like a butchered troll doll. It's just, he's so horrible to look at and incredibly annoying. Like, he tries so hard to be quirky and funny and cute, and it's just not. It's bad. Yeah.
He's, I guess, you say troll doll, I say leprechaun. He's the comic relief, and between the mouth moving at the weird thing and the weird voice, I didn't even really understand what the heck he was talking about half the time. That was, I think, a waste of a character.
This creature of Quill Door, which is so awkward and weird and annoying, is really like a mashup of like, what if Gimli from Lord of the Rings had a love child with Gandalf? That's what he'd look like.
Yeah, I mean, he definitely, he was a legitimate Jar Jar Binks character. He was supposed to be funny. He really wasn't. I still stick to my leprechaun story, but I am very much. Your theory might actually work as well.
Yeah. Well, his face reminded me of melted dog shit. That's basically what it reminded me of.
Well, melted dog shit would probably have moved better when the character was talking.
Oh yeah. Yeah, I think it was all around just a bad idea. I mean, you can do a mascot character, obviously. Like, I think a prototype for this movie was definitely Star Wars. They were trying to copy that pretty hard. I mean, and there were a lot of mascot characters in Star Wars.
There were a couple of scenes that, to me, seemed like direct rip-offs of Star Wars. First of all, the first one, when I think the opening scene with Skeletor, he's walking in the castle and he has, his henchmen walking next to him, giving him like an update of what's going on with the war, and that reminded me very much of the scene with Darth Vader and the Emperor.
Another just hilarious part that I find this to be so mind-numbingly ridiculous but funny. They're basically losing this war against Skeletor's army, and their only hope is to like flee the scene of the attack. So they open up the portal, which happens to take them to Earth. And then, what is their plan after they get to Earth? How do we get back to that exact same position?
Yeah, I didn't really notice that. That's actually kind of funny, because you're right. They struggle to get out, and then the whole thing is how do they get back?
Yeah, Man-at-Arms even comes up to He-Man and he's like, so what's our plan now, like fearless leader? And He-Man's like, we've got to get the key back and get back to Skeletor's castle. It's like, wait a minute, weren't we just there and we fled for our lives?
It just doesn't make any sense. They were losing, what we're coming back, to do was just dumb. It's just so dumb.
Oh, and it's even more absurd because like Man-at-Arms kind of laughs about it, like, oh, that's not a very good plan. We're just gonna get wiped out again. But they go along with it instead of even trying to come up with an alternate idea.
I love when movies are like, they can't even like sell you on the idea that they've actually created a coherent story, so they kind of like make fun of it in the movie. Like, yeah, it's a stupid plan. Maybe you guys should have written a better one.
No time for that. We have to sell the merchandise.
Exactly.
Oh boy. Did you notice anything should I say, familiar about the opening credits?
You know what? I'll be honest, I don't even remember them. Were they Star Wars-esque? That wouldn't surprise me one bit.
It was an exact rip-off of the Superman credits.
Okay.
Like from the first Superman movie. It was just, so blatant.
I'll take your word on it. I don't think there's an original idea anywhere in this entire movie. I would challenge anyone to give me one example of something that was original, and I win that 100 times out of 100, I'm sure.
Yeah. I think that's an underlining quote that we should remember for this whole podcast here.
Yeah.
Speaking of bad costumes and makeup, that creature with the blonde hair, I was like, it talking through its teeth. I couldn't even tell if that was supposed to be a male or female. You know,
that was one of the quote-unquote assassins.
Yeah, assassins.
Yeah, you couldn't shoot straight.
Yeah, they couldn't do anything straight.
Yeah, it seemed like, once again, they were just sort of like a collection of, like, you know, alien stereotypes. You know, you had sort of this futuristic-looking human, the ape-man or whatever it was, or maybe more than an ape-man, but, you know, they were just sort of like this random assortment of completely different-looking, you know, sort of generic alien thing that you see in every movie.
The characters, like, the villains weren't scary. They weren't, like, fun for the kids. They were just, awful looking. Oh my god, a scene that was just so incredibly underwhelming and just blew my mind how stupid funny it was. He-Man being the brave, and he's supposed to be like a PSA character, because in the cartoon he was always giving this advice to children. And he's not just supposed to be a big, strong guy, heroic. He's also supposed to be kind of a strategist to some degree. And, you know, he goes in there to face off against Skeletor for the first time. And here's Skeletor, who's basically a terrorist. It's wiped out his entire land. Now, you would think He-Man would be really pissed off and have something, you know, powerful, emotional, and convincing to say to Skeletor to put him in his place. What does he say to Skeletor? He goes, "Let her go." He's talking about the sorceress.
Right.
And
what is the connection between those two characters? They seem to be, they obviously know each other, and they seem to have some sort of, I don't think Dolph Lundgren displayed, or He-Man, or displayed a single emotion in this film. At any point, he did not show any anger, sadness, happiness, anything.
I wonder how many takes they did with that speech, that long speech he had, "Let her go."
Getting back to the movie, right? So they end up on Earth. The bad guys follow them. Courtney Cox gives them the key back, and so you have a situation where basically down Main Street, Skeletor and tons of these Stormtrooper lookalikes come through this portal, and I'm guessing once again this is a cost thing. This town is completely abandoned. There's nobody there. There's nobody except for the group that includes He-Man, you know, his cohorts, Courtney Cox and her boyfriend, and the bald Top Gun guy. There is not a single moving car. There's not a single pedestrian. There is nothing.
Where the hell is everybody? Is it like some kind of holiday extravaganza? What's going on?
Well, even if it's 2-3 in the morning, which you know, I don't think that the time lapse of this movie would not make you believe that it's 2 or 3 in the morning. It probably would feel more, maybe, you know, midnight. But even
no, it definitely wasn't. It wasn't 2 or 3 in the morning, because I remember the guy mentioned that the concert was like it seemed like a senior dance. He's like, oh, it doesn't start till like 9 or 10, and she was talking about her flight being like at 8 o'clock or something.
Okay, so yeah, I mean, so the point is, even if it was 2-3 in the morning, you'd still have like a random car, you know,
Absolutely.
You drive around anywhere. This was not it was a small town, but it was a sort of a city, a town center. The place was completely abandoned, and once again, it sort of just makes you look and you go, okay, well, this doesn't make it. It once again sucks you out of the idea that you're, sort of going to believe that this is actually happening.
It definitely did. And I think it kind of got a free pass at the time because it was a kids movie, and a lot of the logical stuff got pushed to the side. It was absurd.
I guess it was designed. The idea, I guess, is that you have this invasion happening, and that if it's supposed to be sort of scary or intimidating or a high stakes type of thing, you'd want some people to appear to be scared. It looks like they're invading a ghost town, and that there's nobody there to even worry about. So it doesn't make the stakes seem very high.
Yeah. It was kind of. I actually was bored quite a few times during the movie, and it seems like that. Also in the crazy action scenes that seem to go on a little too long, especially the one in the music store.
You mean the one where basically they just stood behind cover and just shot lasers for like 10 straight minutes?
Exactly. Yeah, and I'm like, wow. Could there possibly be more laser beams flying around in different directions at once?
Well, two things there. Like, how bad are these assassins? These are supposed to be Skeletor's best assassins, right? They come through the portal. They can't even kill a 19-year-old fast food worker. Secondly, what is He-Man doing? He's sitting there. Like, he doesn't become like a superhero.
Yeah.
Okay. He's a superhero at the beginning of the movie where he's killing people with his sword. In the whole, the remaining, hour and a half of the movie, he just kind of doesn't really do anything. He's almost like I mentioned this before, he's almost like a sidecar. He's almost just there. And by the way, when he does swing his sword and fight with his sword, he is so awkward and so slow. The action's so slow.
Here's the thing about He-Man. It's like I wanted to talk about how he is nowhere near the cartoon character or the comic book version. Here we have this just a big dude. Like, okay, he's the barbarian, yeah, but He-Man, the whole thing about him is he's Prince Adam. He's this kid who's kind of shy, and everyone thinks he's just like, oh, we need to protect him because he's vulnerable and he's royalty. And he transformed into He-Man in the cartoon. It was like this major transformation, and I think kids kind of identified with that and really, thought, okay, I can become a superhero someday. And the movie, you have none of that. He's not the most powerful man in the universe, which is what he's supposed to be. He's supposed to have strength that is on par with Superman. You get none of that in this movie. He's not even a skilled swordsman. The sword is like a needless accessory instead of like a really cool element to his character,
Well, I think the other thing too is that's sort of like, that dual personality, that, normal person then / hero, that's sort of like the core of every comic book character, right? Like,
yeah, right on. That's the number one thing that upsets me the most about this movie is that He-Man is not a central character. He's just a part of the team. He's just like, okay, there's that guy there who's big and strong and helpful, but the whole movie is supposed to be about this dude who is like on par with Superman. The children love this character, and they underplayed him so much. You're right. He's the main character for the first 5 minutes and the last 5 minutes. Yeah. If you want proof that He-Man is like the most generic character of all time, I have this quote from Roger Sweet here. He says, "I realized simplicity was the key to success. I simply explained that this was a powerful figure that could be taken anywhere and dropped into any context because he had a generic name, He-Man." So yeah, they just basically wanted this ambiguous barbarian guy.
it's almost like they wanted to put it. It's almost like they made the guy made a bet with somebody. He said, "Listen, I'm going to create a toy line, and I'm going to invest nothing in it. Like, I'm not going to make the characters interesting. I'm not even going to give them names. I'm going to name the guy He-Man. What does that mean? Well, he and man are, nothing name. I'm going to put zero effort into actually making characters that are interesting.
Yeah.
I'm still going to make a truckload of money because people are stupid, I guess."
Yeah, well, it was basically a complete rip-off of Conan the Barbarian. What the thing was is that the owners of the copyright for Conan the Barbarian at the time approached Mattel to make a line of figures based on Conan, and Mattel was like, yeah, sure, we'll do that. What happened was they ended up making the He-Man figures and giving the Conan guys no credit, and they changed the prototype of the character was originally tan and dark-haired like Conan. They changed it to lighter skin with blonde hair, and they were able to win the lawsuit. They didn't get sued for copyright infringement. So there you have it.
There you go. It's an original idea, blonde hair. It just seems like the opportunity is there to make an okay movie, and maybe it's not going to be great. Maybe it's still a forgettable movie.
Oh, man, absolutely. They could have knocked this out of the park. It could have been a huge hit. It had a lot of potential, but it was Cannon Films. Cannon Films are notorious for having a low budget. These are the guys that made Superman 4.
Which is widely reviled.
Yeah, because the production value of Superman 4 was like an all-time low. You could see strings that characters were hanging from, just to name a few stuff. Christopher Reeve wrote about it in his autobiography. But yeah, Cannon Films, they later went on to become bankrupt not long after this movie.
I thought that the laser effects were okay in this movie.
Yeah, that's probably where all the money went.
It seemed pretty rushed.
I would have been fine if all the other characters pretty much used guns, except for He-Man, because that's how He-Man fights. That's his fighting style. He's the strongest man in the universe. He doesn't really need a gun. But they just had him carrying around that sword all the time. Like, no matter what he was doing, it seemed not only ridiculous, but incredibly, cumbersome. And
This has been quite heavy. It was a massive sword.
Right. I mean, you got this big barbarian guy. You think he's got all that muscle. He's going to be swinging that sword around like crazy, and that's going to be fun to watch. But he barely uses the dang thing. It was just completely disappointing.
So you didn't have as much of a problem with the fact that he's the only guy walking around with a sword.
Oh, I admit that it's totally ridiculous because they never established that He-Man was any different than a regular person.
Right, and that goes back to what, way at the beginning, when they just sort of dropped you into, what would sort of normally be considered Act 2, I guess, right?
No character introductions whatsoever. The first time we see He-Man, we're staring at his back. He's looking at the horizon sky. And he turns around, and the look on his face is just dead, nothing expression.
That's what we call a Lundgren.
A Lundgren.
Yeah, I mean that's sort of his. That's his go-to, I guess. Sort of, you get back to the final question being, how does it hold up by today's standards?
Yes.
I would say not well. If this was a movie that, like a Rocky movie or a Schwarzenegger action film that you occasionally get on, TNT on a Saturday afternoon, I would say sure, watch it. It's not unwatchable by any means.
Yeah.
If this movie were made today, the story would be a lot better. Even if it was a lower budget film, I think that I think a lot of the biggest problems with the movie are not really solved by money. It's just they needed to get a better script and a more coherent story.
I agree. Yeah. It doesn't compare well at all to today's standards. It was definitely a low budget movie. Any way you look at it, it could have been a lot worse. I will say that. They had. Go ahead. Sorry. Go ahead.
Well, what's crazy about it is that why was it a low-budget movie? He-Man was a pretty big property at the time.
Yeah.
You'd have to imagine that whoever was in charge of it would be motivated to have a movie be a success, because it would only mean more sales of toys and TV shows and everything else. I'm sure they'd have a piece of the action. So why would they go to a Canon Films or not a big time studio and do it the right way? I don't understand.
I can't imagine that they had a hard time pitching this movie to get greenlit, because the toys were selling through the roof. The cartoon was a huge hit. Maybe the problem was that they thought it was going to be a fantasy film, and fantasy films at the time were doing really poorly. Look at Krull, Legend, Dragon Slayer, Labyrinth. They all had lackluster returns. I think that's where they decided to make it a blend of sci-fi and fantasy, because they said, oh, look at Star Wars. Star Wars did incredibly well. If we could copy that formula, then we'd have a success.
You can almost imagine some movie executives chewing on a big fat cigar going, kids don't want fancy these days. They want sci-fi. They want laser beams. And, and there you go,
Exactly.
It's confounding, really, how in an era when those movies are a big budget affair, how did this end up like this,
It was a perfect storm. Just a train wreck waiting to happen. We got time for a little bit of fun facts, some trivia. I went around the web and scooped a few things up. Dolph Lundgren, despite sounding like a dumb blonde, couldn't be further from that. He's actually has a master's degree in chemical engineering.
That's a fucking lie. That has to be a lie. I don't think that.
He's also...
he graduated from clown college, I would have a hard time believing.
Yeah. The Arnold Schwarzenegger School of Acting.
Yeah, he flunked out Arnold would be able to swing his sword properly.
He's also a second-degree black belt in Kaioshin Karate.
I take back everything I said about him so far in this podcast. He was fantastic in this movie.
Yeah, well, we didn't get to see the slightest bit of his martial arts ability in this movie.
Frankly, he didn't see the slightest bit of the agility you assume that one would have to be a black belt in martial arts.
Right, yeah.
He seemed very lumbering and stiff.
How about this for you? Dolph Lundgren, when he was doing the costume fitting, he wanted to wear these kickboxing boots, okay? He wanted to wear the kickboxing boots instead of the boots that the costume designer had picked out. And he was really hell-bent on that. They called in the producer, or maybe it was the director, and showed him the boots, and the guy said that the boots looked too feminine on Dolph Lundgren. That immediately changed Dolph Lundgren's mind, and he went to the regular-sized boots.
Dolph Lundgren is a manly man. He will not tolerate anyone saying anything other than that. So that doesn't surprise me, actually. He seems like a pretty macho type of guy, and wouldn't necessarily enjoy the implication that he was less than that. So that's interesting, but not terribly surprising.
Yeah.
I'm surprised he didn't punch the guy in the face, but,
They had big plans to make a sequel. They actually started filming the sequel, and what happened was they ended up scrapping what footage they had and making the movie, just calling the movie Cyborg.
Really? So there's another movie that exists that was originally a Masters of the Universe sequel? Is that what you're telling me?
Yes, the movie Cyborg. Most of the footage is from them trying to make the Masters of the Universe 2.
Have you watched that movie?
No, I have not. I've read a few comments on IMDb about Cyborg.
I think that I will be watching Cyborg shortly.
Yeah.
To me, that might be more interesting than actually watching this movie. That would be very interesting to me if they could somehow cobble that together to be something good. My guess is that it's terrible, but I think I might actually try to get my hands on a copy of that.
From what I gathered, it's a pretty crappy movie, but... That's just fun.
Well, I'm already committed to this one, so what's another few more hours of wasting my time?
Right. We have a comment from the director, Gary Goddard. Used inspiration from a lot of Jack Kirby's work at Marvel Comics, such as the Fantastic Four, Thor, Thanos, and actually tried to hire Jack Kirby as the production manager.
Yeah, I mean, Marvel is, I mean, obviously this is sort of a newer thing, but Marvel movies are generally of pretty good quality. Some people have some qualms about some of them individually, but I think if you look at the collective group, you can say, they do a pretty good job making these movies.
You want to know a good prototype for a Masters of the Universe movie based on today's standards? It's Thor, the movie Thor.
Yeah. Thor, yeah.
That is proof that a Masters of the Universe movie can be done well. It's almost actually the same thing.
Thor breaks the rule that I said earlier that there's never good ideas when they transplant them to Earth.
Yeah.
Thor pulls it off, and they do it because they actually develop the character a little bit and use actual comedy. The scenes with when Thor first arrives on Earth. Well, first of all, he arrives, of course, not wearing the Thor outfit. Right?
He's not in that ridiculous costume. Yeah, he's not carrying around a huge sword everywhere he goes.
Right. If Thor came down to Earth and had the Thor, the outfit and the hammer, it would be more jarring. And then when it finally does happen, either accepted or partially accepted, or at least have heard the idea that he claims that he's Thor, it's almost you're expecting it at that point. But
Thor also, the thing that it did wonderfully well, it actually acknowledged and promoted the humorous part of it, like the ridiculousness of this character being a fish out of water.
The Marvel movies in general has done comedy well, and there wasn't any humor in this movie, that's for sure.
Not intentional.
Right, yeah, exactly. Only the unintentional in writing. Did it make money?
Yeah, actually, I had some statistics. Here we go. All right. Masters of the Universe, 1987. I'm not sure what the budget was, but we're going to compare it to Superman 4, which came out in July, which was a little bit earlier than Masters of the Universe, so they are both summer movies by the same company. Superman 4 made $15 million. Okay, underwhelming.
87, that's not terrible, though. No.
It's not horrible, but it was less than their budget. They spent more on the movie than they did, grossing. Masters of the Universe made $17.3 million with a much lower budget.
Interesting.
Now, to put that into perspective, do you have any idea what was the highest grossing movie that year?
Oh, God. I'm going to guess Platoon.
No, that's a good guess, though. It was actually 3 Men and a Baby, which went $167.8 million.
the Steve Gutenberg opus.
Yeah.
167 million, yeah, that's pretty impressive. That movie was a huge hit, though, so...
yeah, a lot bigger than 17.3 million, that's for sure.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
But it was like top 30 that year.
Really? It was in the top 30 films of the year?
Top 30, yeah, but so was Superman 4. So this the sequel that they planned to film was actually going to be done back-to-back with a Spider-Man movie, which would have been the very first Spider-Man movie. But get this. The company refused to pay Mattel the licensing fees. But my whole thing is, if you can't afford to do one license for a movie, how can you do two back-to-back?
Oh, sure. No question.
Like, they were definitely trying to get away with something there. Cut corners.
Oh, and they went out of business, right, eventually, so...
Yeah, they went bankrupt not long after that. So, if I was going to rename this movie, I would give it the name The Battle of the Multicolored Laser Beams, or The 10 Million Laser Beam Fiasco.
Seriously, though, if I was going to rename it, I would call it, I don't know, Star Wars versus Conan or something like that.
There you go.
Yeah, that's really... And then talk about the licensing to to make that movie, but that would cost you. But boy,
it's like, okay, what if Arnold Schwarzenegger played Luke Skywalker and had a really, really bad script?
Can we talk about the end real quick?
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
They basically transport Courtney Cox and her boyfriend back to Earth, and they wake up. Courtney Cox wakes up, and now apparently the interdimensional key also has time travel capabilities. She wakes up and her parents are still alive. She's been transported back in time before the accident that kills them so that she can stop it. Now,
they should just call it, instead of the cosmic key, they should just call it ultimate plot device, because that's what it is.
Yeah.
I mean, it can travel through dimensions. It can also conveniently take you back in time.
Right, and of course, a device that can take you through time is infinitely more valuable than a device that can transport you to another dimension, especially in a war situation.
Yeah.
And you know what was also weird was that, so Courtney Cox comes downstairs, her parents are there, and she, tells them that, don't get on that flight today, and they kind of resist, and she just, runs up. But why couldn't they just have had the parents acquiesce? Why do they need to add that extra wrinkle of them resisting? And I guess the answer, like I said, is that they need to have them meet in the street where they both, you realize that for sure that this wasn't a dream. This is something that actually happened. But it just seemed contrived. I don't know.
It was totally contrived. I mean, it was like the most forced and rushed ending you could possibly imagine. It's
like she grabs the flight stuff and runs out of the house. Where is she going?
Exactly. Yeah, she's just like, I'm going to go into the street now because that's where people meet up at the end of movies.
Just by pure coincidence.
Maybe they had seen Back to the Future 2 or something. I don't...
Yeah, I guess.
Yeah, that was a horrible... And, I mean, the way it was forced and rushed like that didn't make any sense. The parents... They were not acting themselves. They were clueless, and it was a blunder. Like, the dialogue was awful.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, I mean, that part just struck me. They were, well, I think you said it before. I think they spent all their budget on laser beams. So
yes, they did. Yeah.
It was.
Pretty sure that's proven.
Or even for the time.
If you look it up, I think it would say that 95% of the movie was spent on laser beams.
It certainly was not scripts or, anything to do with the story.
Maybe a lot of the budget went into Dolph Lundgren's diet.
Maybe, I'm sure that did they even have protein shakes back then?
The late 80s, yeah, maybe.
The biggest line item on the budget is chicken breasts for Dolph's program.
They probably just threw it in the blender and he drank the chicken.
That would be interesting. I'm gonna try to do that this weekend. And apparently he's a very smart guy, and it's supposed to show you that book intelligence does not mean that you translate very well to certain other things. Well, sorry, Dolph.
Oh boy. So, there we have it, folks. Our first episode is in the bag. I want to thank everyone for listening, and thanks, Steve, for being a part of this, man.
Absolutely, thank you. It was a lot of fun. Hope we can do it again soon.
Yeah, we'll be back again soon with another episode. And with that note, we're signing out. See you next time.